For those who are watching this recording later, it seemed important if I'm wearing this jumper to have the cat sitting in the good chair. Her name is Dallas, for the record.
I appreciate the cat licking away at itself and generally enjoying cat life.
She's just chilling. Yep. She doesn't care.
Mm-hmm.
She's secure enough.
Hello. Good day.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. As usual, wait a few minutes for people to join. Please feel free to find the meeting notes in the calendar invite and add yourself as an attendee.
Man, somebody spent some serious time formatting this document. It's like it's lit up in blue, and the dates are like linkable, and yeah.
I think that's the default now. Oh, and of course, feel free to add agenda items. Agenda is looking pretty light. All right, it's 5 after, so let's go ahead and get started. I assume you all can hear me. Thanks everyone for joining. I get a thumbs up, thank you. So as usual, the meeting notes are in the calendar invite. I'll paste the link again for anybody that just joined in the chat. Add yourself as attendee, and for apologies, Amir had a conflict, so I'll be here leading today. And we usually start out the agenda with introductions for anybody that's new or hasn't been here in a while or hasn't introduced themselves yet. Do we have any folks?
Hello, I'm Mihai. I joined almost a year ago for TensorFlow, but now I moved to supply chain security. So this is my first week there with Abhishek and Bob Calloway.
Any others? Okay. Well, moving on, I wanted to give an update about the meeting time. So we had a discussion. So if you don't remember, 2 weeks ago, we had a later meeting to support APAC region time. And we discussed the meeting time then, which is kind of unfair to the people here because only the people that could make that meeting were there. So a couple other, at least one other working groups have alternating meeting times every other meeting. One to support EMEA, one to support APAC. In general, we got thumbs up that we'd like to do that, although we didn't set the time exactly to that time that we used last time. We thought we would have a poll out for actually for both times, but mostly for the APAC time, which we haven't done yet. But just wanted to bring that up. We haven't changed any. We're not going to change anything right away until we get agreement, and wanted to see if there's any concerns in this group. Okay, I'll take silence as no concerns. So I'll proceed with sending out a poll and seeing if that time that we've been using for the later meeting works on the APAC side. Okay, moving through the agenda, Amir has updated our notes with some key documents, and the first one would be the process for identifying critical projects document. That's kind of funny. So let's take a look at that real quick. Kind of as a reminder, like in the last meeting, we had an update on criticality score, but we also really kind of deviated into the fact that we really need to kind of pull this, the process and the action of creating the list and make it a more formal project within the working group with identified people as leaders on that. So Mir is taking a stab at the document on the first part, which is essentially just kind of covering the process here. So we've got the if you're able to look at it, we've got the objective, deliverable, summary, method, etc. It's a work in progress. He's not here to kind of go over it and present it, so I can't do that right now. But any comments here right now or concerns? Yeah, Jacques.
Hey, I'm caught off. There it goes. I'm caught a little off guard. I've been working on the like risk elicitation approach since, when did I present? Like February or March, something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm even doing talk about it in at the conference in a couple of weeks. I submitted the video yesterday. So I'm sort of curious whether or how that still fits in. Like, I just think, I wasn't able to go to the meeting last week, or I would have asked about it there.
Yeah, I agree. So what I think, what I want to have happen is have you also be like a maybe leader or whatever. I don't know what the terms we have in
Sure.
this effort, and build this collaboratively with somebody like Amir or whoever else is willing to do that. So I think Amir wasn't feeling comfortable with figuring out how that's going to work in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty big step, but I feel justified in arguing for it. Sorry, Michael, I'll just finish up.
Oh, no.
And also, it'll be slightly embarrassing if the talk goes ahead and I have to tell people, psych.
No, I mean, and this is you know, we might like we have phases here. Like this is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
ev-
Yeah.
evolving process, right? So maybe it's like we decide to do something in a first phase, and that, you know, and then that's a sooner thing, and then that comes in later.
Cool.
But I'm just kind of, my takeaway is that we've had a lot of people presenting different ideas, and I think they're all have, you know, very good parts to them, but we're not really having somebody, you know, make the decisions to say like, let's make a plan, let's pick some pieces, let's start working on something, let's do some phases. And I think the step to that is kind of like identifying people that want to stand up and say, hey, I'll be a maintainer of this SIG or whatever project, whatever term we're using for the work efforts inside of working groups. Anything else, Jacques, before we move to Michael?
All Michael's, all yours, mate.
Cool. I think that this kind of all sounds great in terms of like, let's experiment and do something and then iterate. And I do think that there's, I'm not sure how voting on something like 100 projects out of, you know, if there's a pool of 500, you have to choose your favorite, the ones that you would categorize as your, as the 100 most critical to you. I don't know that humans are good at like that kind of work. But whatever, it's fine, even if it doesn't need to be perfect. The other thing though that I'd recommend is thinking about different verticals. So the most critical open source project to some subset of the population out there may be completely uninteresting to another really large subset. So like if you look at like automotive or financial services or consumer or things like that, those lists may be very different. So when we collect data, it would be good to include the persona that data kind of comes from or is expected to align with. Something that we're thinking about for on the alpha omega side is to specifically have like different verticals where the target engagements or the target analysis for one sector may be a different list than for another sector. We haven't ironed it out. It's not, you know, nothing set in stone, but as we're thinking about that, it just occurred to me that critical projects are not critical projects for everybody. Sorry, the same critical projects are not critical projects for everybody. So that was it.
I'm sorry. Can somebody help take notes? And Michael. And Jacques' point. Any volunteers?
I guess I would frame it as sorry, David. Where or does like risk elicitation, like expert elicitation, still fit into the picture, or does it not? I think that summarizes it.
Well, isn't like the verticals exactly that you would have to have expert input in terms of what's important for a specific industry? Or do I get this wrong?
I'm not opposed, philosophically, to experts kind of coming in and doing at least a sanity check on it. But if you imagine if you had good, like, let's just say usage data from a representative set of like the automotive industry, then you could say, well, these are the, you know, top 50 packages that run everything. These are critical. These are used in, you know, whatever the thing.
Okay, I agree. Okay, yeah, you're right. So expert in that sense was to me like an expert from that industry, vertical, not necessarily. And that's slightly.
I think it would be really good to have an
approach. Yeah, okay, get it.
Yeah. It would be really good to have an expert in the industry anyway to make sure that we're not making awful assumptions. But yeah.
I think David, you had your hand up the longest.
Yeah, so a couple quick comments, and I put them in the notes, though maybe I should put them in this as suggestions into the proposed process. I mean, I think voting in the end is probably the only way. I think we're going to need to use a voting rank system, and it needs to be async. I think one of the challenges we did it synchronously earlier, and you know, when you're in a rush and so on, there are reasons we did it that way that time. But if we can do it asynchronously, I think life would be much better. You know, people have different time zones and all the rest of that. And there are ranked voting systems. I'm sure Jacques can tell us the pros and cons of 1,000 of them. But if we have to compare the difference between different Condorcet voting systems, you know, I think we're in the noise level. We're you know, we pick a plausible ranked system and move on. And there are systems that can do this. Before voting, I think one thing that's not clearly captured here, I don't think it's inconsistent, but it's not done here, not clearly spelled out, is I think we need to capture, not just from the original submitter, but from anybody else who has data on why this should or should not be considered a critical component, and then let people do the voting. You know, so hey, include it because it's in the Harvard list, it's number 10, look at all these systems that use it. And somebody else says, yeah, but it's on its way out. That's kind of misleading because of point ABC. And then let folks vote with a much more informed set. And again, I think that capture should be asynchronous. Thanks.
Any responses to David before I think Eric is next?
Yeah, I guess mine is a combination of both voting and the comment on verticals. Just obviously a big +1 on the verticals, but just thinking to what David just said about, you know, this is on its way out, or it's a, you know, essentially a transitive or indirect dependency, and that can really be a key across verticals and other things as to what the criticality of it is. Because let's say version 2.7 of something is secure, but you know, there's 3,000 some odd financial projects that use it as a transitive dependency, and then there's, you know, 10,000 that work in some other vertical. You know, capturing all the metrics around what the parent projects that use them, which and in which verticals, helps to define maturity, right? And how do you define voting just specifically around that value versus the number of things that it leverages? And, you know, is the fact that it's on the way out really relevant? Because we all know that a lot of organizations are behind in keeping up with updating their technologies. You know, their governance plans may not be as good as they should be. So how much of a factor is that in defining what is the top 100 versus the, you know, it's an issue and it affects, you know, whatever the threshold is to determine it's valuable or it's not. So is that, you know, 10,000 or less potential company, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but, you know, some threshold of companies have to be affected by this before it's considered critical? Or what is that voting method? You know, how is that scale determined? And should, you know, my opinion is it should very much be broken down and cataloged by not only vertical, but you know, the metrics around each and every potential parent project, if we're not already thinking that. Yeah. And then, of course, there's different languages and other things. You know, will some dependencies be used across languages and things that may, for example, compile as Java, even though the core language isn't Java? You know, is there a scenario where it affects multiple languages as well? As a dependency in multiple deployed language scenarios. So something to consider, I think, as far as the metrics go.
Thank you. I think next is Jonathan.
Hi. Oh, yeah. I I'm going to ask, hopefully I just don't understand something, and I'll ask a quick question and I'll clear myself up. I see in the process document that sort of criticality is cashed out as would have significant cost and cause significant impact. Is that defined in more detail somewhere for what is being ranked? Or is that the extent of the statement?
So I think kind of that's maybe not in this doc, but in our previous areas around the README and like how are critical projects selected. We kind of, I don't think it's exactly defined. That's a good question, but it's more implied by the inputs we're using, right? So if we say we're looking at the criticality score results, then that's like a busyness input. If we say we're looking at the Harvard census results, where it's the how many other packages are depending on that. So that's a good point. It's not defined, but more implicitly defined by, you know, the inputs we trying to take in to look at to make these decisions, and what those inputs mean.
Okay. In that case, I have a follow-up question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Criticality obviously means different things to different people. Several of those meanings are non-commensurate. I've run into this with trying to define, say, like safety and well-being impact in other vulnerability prioritization things. The US CDC has stuff about well-being impact. You know, there's the IEC, I forget what the number is now, on safety impact, the international standards and the different levels. But in general, loss of life is probably not commensurate to busyness, right? Like loss of money is probably not commensurate with either of those two things. I think it would be risky to ask people to vote without defining what it is they're voting on. Because if one person is like, I have this use case story where this package can cause a loss of life if something goes wrong, and another person is using, I have this busyness criteria where this ranks the highest, those are not, they both might be right, and it's not clear how to adjudicate between those. And that's my comment.
Excellent, thanks. Maybe losing track of who's next. Is it Chris?
Sure. Am I off mute? Yeah, I am. So it's unclear to me that there's ever going to be a singular 100 projects that are most critical. A lot of it has to do with point in time, right? I mean, you know, we could have said, you know, in October or November of last year, hey, Log4j is fine. And then somebody, oops, you know, we find a criticality and then we realize, holy crap, you know. So I think there's a certain aspect of our task here that is really much more to help people make the right decisions about where they invest their resources and where they could be helpful. And so what I'm getting at here is that, you know, we can come up with, and I think, you know, it was mentioned in the chat, you know, we can come up with, you know, in the Java space, Log4j is relatively important. But again, if you look at it in toto, right, you could argue that, you know, Log4j was like 45 or something on the list. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it wasn't, you know, number one. And yet, you know, over the holiday week, a couple of weeks there, it was number one for anybody who was, you know, heavily invested in Java, because it was pervasive. It's everything, you know, about your logging. So, and again, you know, the other comment that struck me was the maturity, you know, oh, this one is sort of going out of style or whatever. But that was the case with Log4j 1.x, right? It's, you know, it was deprecated 5 years ago, right? And yet still people are using it. So, you know, that we have I think we have a combination of things that, these, the leading edge of something, may become critical at some point, but we also have to be factoring in that, the reality of the software industry is that way too much technical debt continues to accrete at an ever increasing pace. And that's where most of the risk is, right? And how do you measure that? And is that a point in time thing? Or, does that become when a project decides, what, we're not going to be supporting, version 1.x of something anymore. We're focusing on the, the head of the, the head of development, and you're on your own. All of a sudden, that puts that thing a little bit higher than it was before. So I don't know that we're going to get anything out of voting as much as if we can sort of get down to here are the top, I don't know, whatever, and put enough information around these things so that people can look at it and sort of crowdsource the criticality of, to them, right? I mean, I mentioned this before, from an IBM perspective, I'm much more interested in understanding which of the projects that I have incorporated into the IBM products and services offerings are the ones that have the most risk. Those are the ones that I care about. Yeah, I mean, yes, we do care about the other ones, obviously, but, very selfishly, we also care much more, about the things that we could get caught up on, right? So again, I don't know that there's ever going to be a universal, here's 100 things that everybody has to focus on. I don't know that it's worthwhile even trying to get to that 100, but we could come up with a system that allows people to understand, yeah, I'm very heavily invested in Java, so on and so forth, and giving them the tools that they can leverage to understand their own particular risk. And then from a alpha omega perspective, we should just really be looking at the top, 10 or whatever that pop up and they're most urgently critical, and that's where we should maybe be focusing the resources. I don't know, but coming up with 100 just doesn't strike me as a meaningful exercise. Thanks.
Thanks. I believe Matt you had your hand
If
up
I,
the longest.
if I may, so, Chris, I had no idea what Chris is going to say and did not coordinate this, but the more Chris talked, maybe the less I have to say. But I want to, I think that, I want to build a bridge between what I see Michael saying, and I don't always attend, admittedly, the Alpha Omega project I did this week. And I think through the Discovery project of trying to get Alpha Omega going, we're finding communities who know they have security problems, and they're just looking for people to line up the correct set of tools for them and give them a way to analyze what they have, the right metadata, the right transitive dependencies to help them. They don't want to boil the ocean, and we can't boil the ocean. That's what I'm summarizing what Chris is saying. So give them the right set of tools and tell them how to run that, and tell them how you analyze the data and what we're giving you to analyze. And if there's something, we work on the tools, we work on how to do it, the methodology, the process. And then maybe we can then work through Alpha Omega and work cooperatively to find these groups to say, here are the tools to help you figure out what are the most critical things if you don't have that. And then maybe we can get more interests. We can pick like a use case or a group that we want to go after, like Kubernetes community or Java community. And then we can get some interest there, and they can tell us what their profile looks like, what what they found, what they think the most is critical. And we get interest there. We can't solve it for everybody, but let's get some different dedicated groups for communities who are willing, who want to do these things enabled. And I will just build on what Chris said as well. I mean, I talked to device manufacturers who use Java, and they tell me my problem is my device is in the field for 10, 20 years. It's got Log4j in it, so it's still important to them. And it's a big deal if they've got to update devices, because they lose track of them. They don't know whether they've been traded to 10 times over to 10 different hospitals. So it's a very big deal to them to track these things going forward. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. I think David, did you ever put your hand down, or you have another one?
I do have another point.
Okay.
Yeah. So, with all respect to Chris Ferris, I do think there's value in making the shorter list because of resource constraints. The reality is we cannot spend, money, time, deeply investing in every single open source project on the planet. I mean, we should do things that help broadly, but we should also focus efforts on the things that matter. And so we need to have some idea of what matters. Michael Scavetta noted that, hey, there's a risk of something either being included in the list that shouldn't be, or not included that should be, but that simply suggests that it's important to make a reasonable list. Because it's not, there's Alpha Omega. There's actually also, I think, some proposals for separate work to do some additional security audits and things. But again, they're all stuck on the for what, for who, for whom. We need to have some idea of what's important. Scavetta simply also noted what's the relationship between criticality and risk. I think that's a fair point. I think at the moment it might be easier to separate the two, Michael. But obviously that's worth discussion. Back when I did the Census 1, we combined those. But simply because there's so many projects out there, trying to come up with the, hey, what's important, and then delving a little further and trying to estimate, and what's the risk here. So, I mean, the Linux kernel, for example, the negatives include, hey, it's in C, it's unsafe, it directly interacts with the hardware. It's much easier for a mistake to become a vulnerability. On the other hand, there are a lot of people involved. They're doing analysis, lots of tools. Whereas here's this other project, it has all sorts of opportunities for problems, and there's nobody at the store. So I think that it's true that we need, for a lot of projects, we need to also consider risk, but maybe I think right now maybe that's easier handled as a two-step process, and maybe this group is part of that, analyzing that as well. But I mean, it's a fair point. I still think, and Chris can disagree, and that's fine. But I think there is value in coming up with a list. Because so many other people need the list to make a lot of progress. Thanks.
So let me just respond very briefly. I don't disagree with what you're saying, David. I don't think, and I did mention maybe a smaller list. I do think there's some value in producing a list based on some objective criteria. I don't see the purpose of voting on stuff, is my point, number one. And number two, I again, Arnaud, I think, said it well in the chat. It's rather subjective, right? Whether it's a point in time thing or whatever, something could be more important than others. If the purpose of this exercise is to come up with a list of stuff that the people in Alpha Omega could be focusing on, okay, that's fine, and let them vote and decide where to put the dollars out of Alpha Omega, rather than us just sort of subjectively trying to sort of vote on things. The second point that I want to make, addresses your risk versus criticality. I don't think they're different. I think they're the same. I think you have to factor, as the thing that you want to focus your attention on is the thing that carries with it the most risk. And the thing that carries with it the most risk, and you described this, I think, fairly well. Linux, yes, there's risk. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. It's so forth. But to your point, there's a lot of eyeballs looking at it. There's a lot of people focusing on security. There's people ready to land patches on a moment's notice. And we have in process a place for updating, releases and so forth. That is pretty well taken care of. The thing where something like Log4j version 1.x that's embedded in things like Kafka, that's embedded in other Java-based project solutions and products, is that going from log4j 1.x to log4j 2.x is a significant amount of effort. And so therefore the risk of carrying 1.x baggage is much higher than if something were to have been found in Linux that we could, patch fairly quickly. And we have the processes in place to do that. We did not have the processes in place to deal with log4j. We just didn't, right? We didn't, many people didn't even know where it was, right? And so you had to have this, spelunking exercise of people digging into the software they had to figure out if they have log4j 1.x in them, right? So anyway, I just wanted to sort of tie those things together because I think it's critical that we focus on the things that are carrying the largest amount of risk.
So I think, George, you've had your hand up for a long time.
Yeah, right. I hope you can hear me well. I just wanted to comment on the points that Chris and Lad made. And again, coming back to the verticals, and please excuse me if that has been discussed before. I didn't join that meeting so often. So maybe let's post it as a question. I totally see the value of having a single list, but then also when talking to folks in my company and with folks from the same industry, I think it would be valuable having these verticals because it would potentially help us scaling the resource issue that David and others mentioned beforehand. So certainly a very focused effort like Alpha Omega needs a list, but then the telcos, the automotives and so on, it makes it much easier also within those companies to argue for investment in something like OpenSSF, right? To bring more resources in from that perspective, because I get the question a lot, okay, and how does that relate to the stuff that is important to us? And say, yeah, well, we can try to at least invest in that, but kind of find a good compromise here between the global list that will steer this effort globally, but then also use a few of the resources that hopefully we'll bring in to address the more niche things that are more interested for our industry, so to say. So does that align, David, with Michael, with your perspective on this, or is that too much divergent from your perspective?
I think that's exactly what we think. I mean, some of it is strategically, like how do we bring more people to the table, and if we don't represent, if we don't have a view on their perspective of the world, then they're going to say what's in it for me, and rightly so. So yeah, I think that's, like at the same time, like we don't have to go after every single one, but there are like really big industries that are really critical to the world that use a lot of open source, and why wouldn't we have some coverage there?
Yeah, I'll just kind of throw in, I think, Michael's suggestion that we keep track of the metadata, why are we even ranking this? What source are we using? If we do that on our central effort, then we can have tooling or filtering that can tell us like what are all the things that affect a job organization or an organization in automotive or something like that. So yeah, I like that suggestion. Michael, did you have another point?
Yeah, well, so one more thing, just to go back to criticality versus risk, and this is a great like conversation, like this is a good night conversation, because I don't think like it's all opinions, but the way I look at it is from a business perspective. I think a company is going to want to know, are the critical open source projects that I'm using covered in some way? And knowing that they all are low risk because of some activities have taken place is good enough. It checks a checkbox for them. It means I don't need to worry about this. They'll always have something at the top end of their risk, graph. So if separating out criticality and risk means that they can get a warm feeling because the most important to them projects have some something has been done to them or for them, without getting into their like specific risk scenarios and less or more. I don't know if that made sense. It made more sense in my head as I was thinking about it, but.
So we've been throwing around terms like risk. I think one we've also used in the same kind of similarly is likelihood. Is that ring true to everybody else?
No, I disagree.
No, I disagree completely.
So
I
thought-
always define risk, if I may interrupt real quick, there's a
Mhm.
pretty standard definition of risk. It's likelihood plus impact. Okay, it's a
So I
function
thought
of those two
criticality
variables.
was likelihood plus impact.
No, that's
It should
risk.
be, it should be times, by the way, not
Oh,
plus.
times.
Well,
The-
yeah,
The different
I'm being-
dimensions.
Yeah, times is actually under debate is a function of those two parameters. Whether or not you believe that it is an expected value is actually a debate I'm not going to get into. But I think there's a general agreement that it is that it is a function of those two parameters.
So what's the difference between risk and criticality then?
I think the notion here is well, and therein lies the question. I think for many folks, by criticality, they mean the what are the most impactful open source projects? One of the ones where if things go wrong, it's the most harm can occur. Now, whether or not the likelihood of those actually going wrong, that's a different question.
But we're not trying to find the most critical by that definition then.
Well, I mean, according to the definition on the website, it says highest impact. That's what it says. It does not say likelihood. That's a risk. That's the other half of the risk equation. And that's okay if we want to include both.
I'm pretty sure we do, right? Nobody cares about
Actually, that has not been agreed on. I mean, that can be agreed on, but that's something we need to discuss then.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
at least I see. Yeah, I know a number of folks are newer. Some folks have been around for a while, but at least the original definition here was the impact, and that's what the website says. We can fix that.
Okay. And then it's mentioned a couple times in the chat, but I just wanted to reply again that I think we've also firmly understood that likelihood is also a product of the complexity of the project, and the posture of the project, like how many eyes are on it.
I think that's one challenge, is that there's a huge number of ways. I mean, if I was going to measure likelihood, I would ask things like how many maintainers, when's the last commit date, do they know, is there evidence of security practices, things like badging and tools and so on. I mean, there's many ways to measure likelihood, and those are all, of course, estimates, but still, those are ways to do it.
Likelihood of getting exploited, or likelihood of
likelihood of having a vulnerability, intentional or unintentional.
Oh, I mean, I would. The other question that I'd be more inclined to ask is likelihood of being an attack surface that an attacker would actually go after, and anything web facing or processing user supplied input, but so many things end up unintentionally processing user supplied input that were never designed for that. Like they were designed as one off, PDF generators that, ooh, let's do that. And then you start running user supplied input, and then it gets SSRF for people.
Who's next? Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say that criticality is relative. If anything's been hammered home during this call, I mean, I don't know if anybody here is directly representing or indirectly representing groups, but I have a friend, and coincidentally, we were talking last night. He works for a defense contractor, and he was talking. They're being forced to onboard something called Milk Cloud. All these companies will never be represented in open source groups directly. They usually don't. They're using tons of open source, and so to them, if you knew what this software is building and going into airplanes and missile systems and stuff like that, would be critical. I don't even think that's crossed our mind. So again, we need to be mindful of groups who won't be represented here, won't give us money, but are critical to our planet and our lives. You know, so I'm just saying we have to have a way of disseminating these things in a way that it's clearly portrayed as something, as set of tools and things you can use, whatever definitions we create, whatever methodology or process we create can be used by anybody. And the more examples we create of use cases that slice across different industries or things like that, then people like the middle cloud people will pick those up and use those things. They will.
Yeah, I had a couple of things.
Yeah.
I'll do one first and then the next one. So the first one quickly was just quickly on sort of like what you might think of as the ontology of risk. I usually say frequency and magnitude, but you know, people say likelihood and impact. They're more or less interchangeable. I want to distinguish that from the predictive variables that affect either of those two. I think we tend to muddy the waters on that when we sort of say, well, on the one hand, they have lots of contributors, but on the other hand, it's very high impact. It's like, well, those are different variables pointing to two things. And it's important not to mix them up. And also that there are probably dozens of variables that predict either or affect the outcome of either the frequency or the magnitude. The second one is I wanted to sort of respond quickly to what Matt was talking about. One of the things that I talk about in my talk, email me if you want to see a copy, is essentially that we still need expert judgment for exactly that kind of scenario. That's literally like the nightmare case. An expert somewhere knows something that the data do not reveal for whatever reason. So, you know, we still need to rely on the data just because of the scale of the problem, just the vastness of the amount of stuff we have to survey. But we want expert opinion where available and where relevant, where it changes things. Like what we want to do is maximize surprise, right? We want to be surprised by things that were not in the data. That's the most valuable information to us. Something that confirms what the data already tells us, not very useful, right? That's just wasted effort. So yeah, I'm going to stop there. That sounded pretty smart.
All right, well, I think I want to go ahead and wrap this. Oh, or no, one last.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to share an anecdotal data point, which maybe, you know, illustrates some of the issues that some of us are seeing. You know, I was part of the so-called Great MFA distribution project that some of us participated in, which basically, you know, was about getting tokens to what we thought were, you know, critical maintainers of open source projects out there to improve, you know, security overall. And one of the projects I was assigned to was some NPM package. And I contacted the author and I said, hey, we're doing this project and your project was selected. We'd like to offer you a token. These are hardware tokens, right? And the guy says, why this project? I maintain like dozens of them, and this by no means the most popular project that I actually maintain. And I couldn't have an answer. I mean, just to be clear, we based this effort based on the list that was produced initially with the 100 top level projects, right? Most critical. And so even for the author of the package, it wasn't clear why this one rather than some others that he had that were more popular in his opinion. So I think that illustrates very well the difficulty that we're talking about, you know, that we're facing here. It's really hard to define some universal criteria. And that's why I was saying in this chat and along with what I was saying earlier, I think it's very important to have the right disclaimer with the list and explain how we came up with that list so that at least people have an idea of, you know, this is how that it's not necessarily universal point of view. It's a specific point of view that was used to select the list.
Michael.
I think that's actually a great point. I wonder how many open source authors would call themselves critical when they are not, or vice versa, just because they don't, almost by definition, know where their project's being used. And providing that insight back to them might be a value. Be like, you are actually being used on the Mars rover. Like, did you know that? I don't know what we do differently, but
it's nice to think that we could, but my own experience with a couple of key projects is they know that they're being used in SCADA applications and aerospace applications and transport applications and national security applications. And their customers are already extremely frustrating, and just giving them bug reports won't give them full context. Anybody who's critical is full of security people who seem to think that by being secret, they're being safe, and we're not going to be able to fix that. It's a dumb idea, but it's ubiquitous.
That's a good point.
I'll say, but if you give them tools, they will use them. I know that for a fact. So.
Yeah.
So when you say given tool,
if you give them tools that are meant to secure their supply chain or evaluate scorecard or look for scanning tools, if you give them an opinionated set of tools that are vetted by general security people, and they know that they're available and they can trust them, they will employ them in their private clouds or in their respective industries.
They have to be opinionated, and they have to be actionable, and that they generate a report that you can handle to a junior SDE to go fix this.
Right, exactly.
I wonder if giving them also a way to rank their projects for criticality, essentially the tool version of this process. So
criticality
is your SCA data into this, and we'll give you your top 100.
I don't think there's actually a simple ordinal criticality, because I hate using the term, it's a multi-dimensional thing depending on which particular supply chain and who their particular customers are. And eventually every project turns into the nail of the want of a nail.
Okay, we're gonna need to wrap this soon. Jonathan, do you have a short comment?
Yeah, just that reinventing this for open source in general seems to make sense, but like reinventing risk management and risk assessment for individual companies seems like a thing that has been done and that we don't need to do.
I don't know. I mean, from all of your companies here, do you feel like, well, maybe because you're here, you're not representative of who I'm going after, but like, do you think the average company knows what the most critical open source they use is? Because I would say that of every company I've worked for, like, none of them do.
It's the same thing. We need to know where we invest in open source as well. We need to know, we're getting to a point where we're trying to figure out what we use with SBOMs and normalization. We have, like I said, we have 2,000 products, so getting a point assessment and knowing what's critical at given point in time, and given all the different factors of our own internal factors, how prolific are the tools? Are they still being used? Are they still in service lines? That's relative to a company. I can use the same set of tools for a company if you do it for an industry. We're not trying to, but it's all based on open source. We're not trying to, if it came across that any of this was, or at least my perception of it, or how I interpret it is, we're just trying to solve it create a normalized way, an opinionated way, and a prescriptive set of tools, and help people along the way, regardless if they're a company using open source or an industry using open source. It doesn't matter. I don't care who uses it. Make it better. I can't help if I'm going to use Microsoft software from IBM or Apple software. I'm going to use it. I don't care to get the job done. I want it wherever I get the software from, a corporation or an industry or group, make it better. And this is what this group is being paid to do by its members. Figure out a way to make this better, because open source is the problem. These are the promises we're giving back to our own government at the White House. Let's do it, and let's not worry about who's consuming it.
Okay, so I'm gonna cut it. Sorry, David, due to time. But I want to make a really important point. is that, so again, you know, we have discussions, kind of the similar discussions often in the meeting about the same topic. If be sure to check the meeting notes. If you see that your comment or your concern was missed or you know, misinterpreted, please try to correct it there. The main point I'm trying to make here is that as the working group, we're getting more formal about our initiatives. The language is changing. It's either a project or a SIG, and creating a list of critical projects is a initiative of this working group. And we need to have people, you know, not just, I mean, and I don't want to downplay like the discussion and the you know, coming up and providing input when we ask for it, but we need to have people like leading the effort here and making things happen. And we asked at the previous meeting, you know, so I have in the meeting notes current working group project SIG. There's a link to the current projects. The very first project, most important project for this group, is creating the list of critical projects. We need to have people say, I'm a maintainer or a leader of this initiative. In the previous meeting, Amir, Caleb, and David raised their hand. Many of you weren't there, so I'm going to ask now, who wants to be involved either in a contributor or, you know, contributor for working sessions type of thing, or a leader. And I see Jacques raise her hand. Anybody else would like to speak up?
Once the list exists, I'm happy to be a consumer. Like I
Yeah,
have a use case for it once it exists.
Like most working group initiatives, people go off on the side, they do work, they create documents, they maybe have working meetings. They come back to this group for feedback, right? So your feedback is very well, you know, needed and received. When we come back with documents like this, which is an early document, you know, we want to hear that feedback. We want to get that in the notes. So just people that are going to be, you know, I'm not saying if you don't raise your hand now, you're not going to be come back for feedback. This is an initiative of this group. Feedback will be, you know, brought this the project will be brought to this group and for feedback. But if you want to do that, you know, feet on the ground work, raise your hand. And again, the feedback that you provide here is valuable, and get it into the meeting notes or into comments on the actual doc. All right, we're right at the end of time. Thank you everybody for the discussion. There was one last thing that we're also going to be working on status reports for the TAC. But that's not a big deal. We can talk about it again as well in the next one. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and see you in the next meeting.